Public Schools Board of Education meeting. This is the June 13, 2024 meeting. Notice of this meeting has been advertised in the Grand Island Independent, which is the district's designated method of giving notice of these meetings. We want those in attendance to know that copies of the Open Meetings Act are available at the entrance to the boardroom. If anyone in attendance is interested in addressing our board, you are welcome to do so. We simply request that you complete the appropriate form and turn it in to us so that you may be recognized during the request to address the board part of our meeting. If you have not already completed the form, please see the staff person outside the entrance to this room. Public comment is welcome. We do ask that no signs be brought into the boardroom. Mrs. Dibbert, would you please call the roll?
Mr. McFarland.
Present.
Mr. Hawley. Here. Mr. Garcia Mendez. Present. Mrs. Albers. Here. Mr. Sykes. Here. Ms. Maudlin. Here. Mr. Helinski. Here. Mrs. Wilson. Here. Mrs. Jurgens.
Present.
The first item on the agenda tonight is the consent agenda. The consent agenda is to be approved as follows. Items 3.1 through item number 3.8. This is the consent agenda as published. Would anyone like to remove any items or add any items to the consent agenda? I would at this time take a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion? All in favor? May vote. Motion passes. Special recognition. Item 4.1. Whoops.
Yours not working?
There it goes. Okay. What's that?
There's no 4.1. Are you in the June meeting?
You know what? I'm in the June.
To meetings. Go to meetings. And go to July.
Oh, there we go. For some reason, you hit the June. Oh, there we go.
Do we need to revote on the consent agenda then?
Yeah, we'll need to redo the consent agenda. Okay. My error, I had the June up on the board. We need to redo the consent agenda since we're now in the correct month. I apologize. All right. The first item on the agenda tonight is a consent agenda. The consent agenda is to be approved as follows. Items 3.1 through items 3.8. This is the consent agenda as published. Would anyone like to remove any items or add any items to the consent agenda? Seeing none, we may proceed to a vote. Motion passes. Okay. Item number 4, request to address the board. I don't believe we have any tonight. So we move on to item number 5, information items. Item number 5.1, Nutrition Services Community Eligibility Program, Mrs. Chris Spellman.
Okay. Well, let's see if I can. Good evening. I'm Chris Spellman, and I have with me Mr. Oscar Garcia. He's our upcoming director after I am retired in March, and so he's here for some support. And because I'm a little nervous about presenting here, I don't think I've ever presented in front of this board before, so, but I'm sure it'll go great, right? Okay. Okay, I'm going to back up a little bit. Corey, I was wondering, or Dalton, if you could help me find the view for my speaker notes on my Google Slides. I was really going to depend on those. Slideshow,
Go try that. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what I'm talking about.
start from beginning,
There.
presenter view.
So, what we'll want to do is probably
Extend
control.
the display.
Is it P? So we'll go ahead and
I'm definitely not a technology whiz. Oh, there's my kids at his wedding. Don't you love that? There, that's
There we go.
that's right. We have two goings.
if you will full screen this other one for you. Oops.
So we'll go backspace.
Okay.
Okay. Well, good evening, and thank you again for allowing me to tell you more about the community eligibility provision. Lots of really riveting stuff here. And so what is CEP, or the Community Eligibility Provision? First of all, the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act was passed by Congress in 2010, and this act laid out the basis for our updated nutrition standards that we follow today and are continually being tweaked as the dietary guidelines are refined. And the bill also addressed childhood hunger and poverty by implementing a program called CEP, or Community Eligibility Provision. You get kind of used to saying those words really quickly, so I'll try to speak slowly so I don't stumble too much. But the CEP program can be implemented by a district, a school, or a group of schools within a district. So how does this all work? The first thing that is identified is the number of students that participate in SNAP, TANF, which is Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. A student may be identified as a migrant student, a foster child, or identified by the district as homeless. NDE provides all districts with a base of information that shows the number of students that are identified as being on one of the groups stated. The district may have a greater number of identified students because we can identify students who are possibly siblings or part of a household with children that are part of a SNAP program or approved for SNAP, or also TANF. We can't extend benefits if a student is part of a household that has a migrant qualified student or homeless. But we extend quite a few students for eligibility by just simply being a sibling or in the household of a student that's receiving SNAP benefits. So the percentage of directly certified students is multiplied by a factor, and the magic factor is 1.6, and the 1.6 was identified by USDA as the number of children of households that may not be receiving any benefits, any formal benefits, just because families may not choose to apply for those. So the magic number that we want to reach as far as the identified student percentage is 62.5. So anything below 62.5% must be claimed at the paid rate. If it's 62.5% of identified students or higher, those students, when they receive a reimbursable meal, we claim those students at a free reimbursement rate. So the next slide, you'll see that there's a pretty wide gap of the reimbursement rate between a paid student and a free student. So an example would be, well, okay, let's see, the free rate is $4.54 per meal, and that's the upcoming year's reimbursement rate. Reimbursement rates change every year depending on the consumer price index and inflation and all those things. The paid rate for the upcoming year is 55 cents of reimbursement per meal. So there's pretty wide range of discrepancy there. So if we take an example of a school that had 200 students, and if all 200 students ate lunch that day, which is kind of unusual because a lot of kiddos bring their lunch from home or don't eat for whatever reason. But if we had 50% claiming at the free rate, say our identified student percentage was less, and the multiplied by the 1.6, it equaled 50% of our claiming was at the free rate, then our revenue for those kiddos would be $454, and if we were only able to claim the other 100 kids at the paid rate, it'd be $55, total reimbursement of $600 for the day. So in contrast, if that school had an ISP of 62.5% and all 200 students ate for the day, our revenue for the day, reimbursement revenue, would be $908, and so we see an increase of $308. So that's just an example of how the ISP, the identified student percentage, affects the claiming rate for reimbursement. It actually makes financial sense for the district. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So what are the questions we need to ask ourselves? What is the cost benefit of implementing CEP, and at how many schools should we do this at? So there's the list of benefits to the department and district. And a little bit later, I'll show you what our current claiming rate would be at our identified student percentage multiplied by the 1.6 factor. And feel free to, we're gonna open it up for questions later if you have a question about what all these numbers mean. Okay, so the district benefits would see that there's an increase in participation because just like during COVID, more families would participate because meals are offered at no cost. There's a lot less red tape for us as a nutrition services department. We don't have all these applications to process. We don't have to worry about negative balances. Just the claiming process is a lot simpler, and the ease of cashiering at our schools would be greatly enhanced because we don't have to worry about removing the cost of that meal from student accounts, and we don't have to tell a student, oh, well, you can't have this a la carte item because you don't have money in your account for that. We would still require students to have money in their account to pay for a la carte items, which is not part of a reimbursable meal. And of course, there would be no debt because we don't allow charging of a la carte items, so that would be prevented. Our debt this year for the last school year, 23-24, is up towards $11,000, so that would be diminished, and the district general fund would not have to reimburse the nutrition fund for that amount of uncollectible bad debt. Of course, this presentation makes sense to me, but I live it and breathe it every day, so I hope we're following in a trajectory that makes sense to all of you. But as far as benefits to students, I mean, CEP is just basically a no-brainer. It reduces the stigma of a child not having enough money to buy a meal, although we never refuse a meal to any student, even if they owe us $500, we never refuse a student that meal. If we're not messing around trying to figure out the student getting his number and the account and the point of sale machine, hopefully we can just do a quick check mark, at least at elementary schools, and the kiddos can get to the table and have more time to eat their food. The students the parents don't have to fill out an application. That's kind of confusing to parents, how to write down their income. We're trying to track down parents to find out what they meant on their application. A lot of times the language barrier might prevent us from getting that application in the first place. Parents don't have to worry about us contacting about negative or low balances. Those of you with kiddos in school know that, well, when your balance gets to a certain amount, we send out an email just as a reminder that here your kiddo is only, has this much. You might want to think about adding funds to their balance. Of course, they get food, nutritious food for learning and growth and brain development, which we know is that initial level of safety and need in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Oscar refers to that quite a bit. And of course, it provides stability and safety, food security to our families and to our kiddos. So there's so many good things about CEP. So we first applied to participate in CEP during the 1920 school year, and that was kind of a wonky year because USDA and the federal government decided that all meals would be offered as free for all students, but that didn't extend our CEP cycle. We still only had 4 years to have a CEP cycle, even though we ended up not having to charge kiddos for their meals anyway. So the schools that participated are listed there, and then the other side of the list was also part of that, 9 original schools in 1920. So in 2020, 2021, we had the opportunity to look at the identified student percentage again, the updated, and of course more families were getting the benefits of SNAP, and so then there was more student percentage, the student identified percentage was higher. Seedling Mile was added for the first time because they had an identified student percentage of already it was above 62.5, so 100% of their meals were reimbursed as free. So that was good for our department and good for the kiddos. Nope, didn't do that right. Okay, so now we're past we've completed our 4-year cycle, and so we have some decisions to make. And what I've done is I've consulted a tool that is available and endorsed by the USDA. The tool is not created by USDA, but it's a tool created by No Kid Hungry, which maybe some of you have heard of that organization, which is just an awesome organization to help with childhood hunger and poverty and lots of those things. So there's a big spreadsheet, complicated spreadsheet, and we fill out our number of identified student percentage, and it has algorithms and a lot more complicated stuff than I understand, but it projects and it predicts what your revenue might be. So I'm having a hard time seeing that. I hope you can all see that. But there's like 5 different scenarios. The column on the far right is what we're doing right now, which is 10 of our schools qualify as CEP. The first column the first data column on the left shows what would happen if we just didn't participate in any CEP program, and we claimed at the standard rate for school breakfast and school lunch. I'm gonna have to step over here, and I'll try to talk a little bit louder so you can all hear me. Then the grouping number 2, we plugged in the numbers where we wanted to see what would happen if we plugged in every school to participate in CEP. So of course, like some of our lower free and reduced rate schools like Engelman and Shoemaker and Westridge and maybe even Newell and Gates, we took all those schools and lumped them in a group. But again, the spreadsheet and the tool can group certain schools together to maximize the reimbursement rate. How it does that, I really don't know, but I know it's reliable. I have the information for you in the next couple slides. And then the next grouping, number 3, is where we're excluding Engelman and Westridge because they're the lowest free and reduced rate schools, just to see what our projected revenue would be. And then on group 4, it shows excluding Engelman only, because the ISP for Engelman is the lowest of the entire district. Their ISP is maybe 20% of directly certified free students. And so then when you multiply that by the 1.6 multiplier, that's what this file does for us. It projects that what our revenue would be. And you know, there's all those different rows, I guess you would say, where it talks about, it gives you the situation of possibly increasing your participation. So I don't know if we would increase our participation that much, because we already offer free breakfast through another program, and we already offer free lunches and breakfast through CEP for some schools. So I would rather look at that bottom row with no change in participation as kind of like the worst case scenario. And if you see what our current reimbursement has been for this past school year, so what we claimed in meals, our reimbursement was $5.059 million plus a few extra dollars. So if you look at grouping number 2, where we imagine that all schools qualify for CEP, the spreadsheet predicts that we would still increase our revenue at the higher reimbursement rate, because every year, again, is a higher reimbursement rate, over what we've seen this year. So I had an analyst from No Kid Hungry actually go through all these numbers with me. We've been working on them, I'm kind of ashamed to say, all day up till about 2 o'clock today, just to make sure everything's correct, because we did find a couple mistakes that we didn't run the calculator correctly. So this has been combed through quite a bit, but it looks to me like adopting CEP district-wide is a win-win, win-win-win for nutrition services, for the district, for the families and the kids. And so just looking at this, that would be my personal recommendation. And I know that's not my decision to make. And so I think, you know, with our CFO and our superintendent and our assistant superintendent and the board, it would be up to you all to direct us on what path to take. Let me go to the next slide here. What do we have here? So the information, the spreadsheet that was sent to you in the agenda, I would say please just disregard that, and I apologize for that. I kind of got a late start on this for several reasons. Some are my own fault and some were hang-ups by NDE. And so it is what it is. I'm still getting information, but today was the deadline, and this is the information that I'm setting in front of you all. And so if you'd like to look, I'm going to email this to you all. I just didn't have everybody in a nice little tight email group, but I will do this for you after the presentation here. But if you want to check out No Kid Hungry, if you want to look at the NDE site and see where I'm getting my numbers, if you'd like to look at the worksheet, the tool, this organization called Meals Count is the one that developed that. They actually developed a tool for the IRS to use so that more people could file their taxes online. So it's a legit, well-researched, well-funded organization that does this. So I guess now, I mean, you've heard what my recommendation is. I'm sorry, I was supposed to let Oscar talk for part of it.
I'm okay, I'm observing.
You'll get your chance here in about 8 months. So what questions do you have at this point, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Ms. Albers?
So Chris presented to FNF, and those board members that were in attendance at that meeting thought that she should come in front of the board. I didn't know she hadn't presented to the board before, but I thought that this was really interesting, albeit complicated information, because anytime you can feed a kid, it's good. And I know Mr. Gilbertson had told me, and I mentioned this in FNF, that every day, he has kids saying, when is free lunch going to come back? So there are kids out there that need free food that aren't getting it. Either their parents can't fill out the paperwork, they don't want to fill out the paperwork, it's too complex, whatever their reasons are. So when Chris presented, and then she showed us the numbers that she told us to just disregard.
Well, the analysis isn't quite right, but the raw data, the numbers are correct. So where I say this percentage of, would be paid or whatever.
Well,
So
it was some of those percentages that I called jaw-dropping in the meeting, because we'd been Chris and I had conversations about CEP for the last couple of years, because some of the board members in Omaha have talked to me about it, and some of the other cities that I have visited with, they also have CEP. And so it was something that I really was hoping that we could get for all of our students in Grand Island Public Schools. And so when she presented this, I didn't know this was what we were going to get, but I think this is such good, positive information, so good for our kids. And regardless of the reasons why we're eligible for CEP, it is what it is, and we might as well take advantage. And I can only see it being helpful. So that's my 2 cents.
I'm going to see if I can, and I know I don't have much more time, but I'm not a whiz enough on my computer, but the direct cert with the ISP percentages, of course, we're looking for over 62.5. Every school, except for Seedling Mile this year, their direct cert with the factor is 59.65. Okay, Gates is, 51.85. Senior High is 51.77. Newell is 58.9. And then I don't have the numbers for Engelman, Shoemaker, and Westridge right in front of me, but I know Shoemaker and Westridge are like at the upper 40s. And with all this fancy grouping on how you're going to claim and how you group your schools, it comes out to be it's not going to be a detriment to our general fund our fund where general fund is going to have to bail us out. And one thing, do you want to mention what the bailout might be? We talked about it a little bit before the meeting.
Well, the thing about any debt, the USDA doesn't let us write off any bad debt, unpaid debt from the parents. So as such, it's onto the general fund to pay for any bad debt. So with this, I mean, when we talk about being a win-win, we talk, we're gonna be receiving the funding, even if it's not at 100%. I mean, it's a win because there's not gonna be any debt at the end of the year and none for the board to have to pay. And so what it is the way kind of that we group them, as Chris was speaking, even though 62.5 is our sweet spot number where we can get 100% reimbursement back, there's schools that surpass that. And like Lisa Albert says, it is what it is, why the reason that it's irrelevant. It's kind of bittersweet, but those numbers at our schools that have been identified from the previous schools keep going up in their ISP. So we started off at 62, some schools have gone all the way up to 70% of ISP. So what we do is,
What about opting out?
oh yeah, and then another thing too is that in the middle of this school year, if we're seeing that it's not quite operating how we want it to operate and we're not bringing in the funds that we think it's necessary to operate the program, the 4 years is what we get in the program. But we're able to opt out at any point in the program. We can opt out in the middle of the school year. We can opt out at the end of the school year. So we're not bound to stay in CEP district-wide if we see it's not feasibly possible.
That's a huge comfort, I don't think, I feel confident in these numbers, and the expert helped us with these, but that would be our opt-out if we had to.
Mr. Hawley.
First things first, don't feel bad about working on this until 2 o'clock. Some of the best work gets done at the 11th hour, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we all know that. Number two, I just want to highlight a point that you made in your presentation when you talk about the benefits of this to everyone. The district and the students, the first bullet point you had was no stigma. And I think that's important because whenever we're not creating opportunities, we're creating obstacles. And if we're not creating opportunities for students to eat, which we've seen, I mean, even with what we have now to put money into your student account, it's a minimum $25. Sometimes parents don't have $25 to put in. And if you don't have $25, plus the dollar fee it's going to charge you, they can't put money on their kids' accounts. And then we have kids, like we've said, going to school who you don't have money for this, or we still feed them, but there's a shame that comes with that. And I think that out of all of this, aside from generating revenue, which is really, really important, not shaming our students is at least second, if not tied with it. So
Even if it's not outward, it's
absolutely,
internal.
absolutely, and
Probably just as important.
it is. And I sincerely appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you for the presentation.
Mr. Garcia Mendez.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I love that you brought up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I do love that concept, and we can't teach our kids at the district, and kids can't learn if they don't have the nutrition and food in order to be the sponges that we want them to be, right?
Kids can't learn.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for bringing that up. Also, just to note that No Kid Hungry, I think it's an amazing organization. My employer, Nebraska Appleseed, works with them a lot in food insecurity, and so I think that I can attest to that organization and the great work that they do. So just this is super exciting, honestly. And I just had one kind of quick question. Do you know what was the increase in participation when we did offer free meals? It's not a biggie, but kind of like a guess.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I don't have that information
Okay.
in black and white in front of me.
Yeah.
And the whole COVID thing with us doing the alternate meal delivery method,
Okay.
I don't
yeah.
know if that
It's a
number
lot.
would even really be valid.
True. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. No, yeah, that's just an interesting point, because it looks like we'll still have revenue, even worst case scenario.
Oh, yeah.
People don't opt in, but
Yeah.
yeah, I really love this. Thank you.
Ms. Albers.
So at FNF, you were waiting for NDE to get back to you with some percentages, and you thought optimistically that you would have them by today, but did they not arrive? Did they?
I received an additional 3 schools, the Gates, Newell, and Senior High, we had to submit those. We have to submit all the names of all the kids and the way they're identified as eligible, and they verify that. They look at every student and say, well, we don't have this student as being a migrant. Can you prove that he's a migrant? And so we have that with those 3 additional schools. To do district-wide, I would have to submit every student name who qualifies with some type of eligibility to NDE, and they would have to go through that list and verify. So far, we've been able to verify 100% of our kiddos. And like I said, we have a higher number than what NDE is saying because they don't know about some of the determinations we make at a district level.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Because I think at FNF, and Josh, Hank, at this point, I don't think that they were thinking it was going to be district-wide. They were thinking they were going to put GISH
Yes.
in. It was just going to be GISH, which I was thrilled about, and I think we were all thrilled about. But so this is even, you guys are even getting better news that it could be district-wide. So very exciting.
I apologize for that difference. Like I said, it was all kind of,
It's
happened
we're
in the
moving
last
up.
5 days, you know.
No,
Yeah.
it's all good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I'll definitely be available after the fact too if you have questions, so
All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you.
thank you.
Item number 5.2, QC Puff School Safety and Security Projects and Funding. Mr. Paul Grieger and Mr. Dan Petch.
Good evening, everybody. Paul Grieger with D.A. Davidson. Thanks for having me out.
Evening, everyone. Dan Petch, Grand Island Public Schools Director, Buildings and Grounds.
Dan and I
Here for support.
We spoke about the support role and how we might ham and egg this thing tonight. Dan put together a list of proposed projects that we've met with Gilmore and Bell Bond Council to vet. And I know there's some attachments on here. Maybe everybody's had a chance to review them, but I'll just quickly. We have a new law changing, or it has changed, but becomes effective July 18th. So once that the amendments to the existing QC Puff rules take place, this proposed list should fit within the new legislation. We've identified approximately $8.9 million of projects. And we think, depending on markets and how we can fund the bond issue, it's somewhat interest rate sensitive, but we think we're hoping to be somewhere above $7 million should interest rates remain similar to where they are today. So it'll be up to the school district then to prioritize which projects get funded. And visiting with Dan a little bit earlier today, we're optimistic that maybe some of the bids could come in a little bit lower. So maybe we can get as much, more of that list accomplished than less. So we're optimistic there. In order to complete this financing, we will be back in front of you, should we be invited back next month, to offer a resolution that would authorize the issuance of limited tax building improvement bonds. And then it would have within those documents the itemized list. And then we would ask for approval of that document. And then from there, we'd work with the leadership team to present the financing to Standard & Poor's, go through the bond rating process, and then be positioned to sell bonds after the 1st of September, so we can close the financing in the next fiscal year. And that should align then with Virgil's plans on budget. So with that, I'll take a pause. Does anybody have any questions for me on anything I said or maybe didn't say?
Mr. Fisher.
Paul, just to clarify, the $7 million that you're looking at generating through the bond fund, and that's issuing with the idea that we would levy about 1 cent annually to pay that bond, is that correct?
Correct. Thank you for that. So the district currently has outstanding other limited tax bonds that are payable from the QC Puff levy, Qualified Capital Purpose Undertaking Fund. It's easier to say QC Puff. It sounds cute too. But we've been modeling, the current limited tax levy is 2 cents. And it's my understanding that we were asked to solve for another penny to get us to 3 cents. Then I believe there's some other things being done behind the scenes to help manage that tax impact. So 3 cents over 10 years is what schools are allowed to levy for these types of projects. So we'll be right there at that cap. And that's one of the reasons why the dollar amount I mentioned was limited, because if interest rates come down a little bit further, we can squeeze out a little bit more revenue out of that 3 cent levy. Should they go the other way, then we're limited in the other direction. So thank you for that question.
Mr. Garcia Mendez.
Thank you. I was looking at some of these projects and they look very interesting. Are these, I kind of lost my question now. Sorry. I guess for kind of like some of these projects, I was looking at the, I guess if they do get funded, what would be the, I guess, timeline? Would that be just kind of like something that we kind of like see when they get implemented? Because a lot of them look like very, very good best practices, I'd say, for public schools to take. You look at like the Raptor visitor management system, and you look at the era, I guess, the climate that we are in school safety around the nation. And I remember reading about them, which is like super exciting to see that this is one of the projects, because we always want the safety of our students to be paramount to anything. And that one got me really excited. Also the vape detection system, AI powered weapon detection system thing. Can you speak a little bit more to those? I mean, you don't have to go at length, but also timeline, I guess. If this were to pass, what would be the timeline for that? Thank you.
I can talk to that. First off, just most of these projects come directly off our project list for the buildings. And so the cameras, the intercoms, the vape detection that goes with those, all that is part of what we have been working on currently. We have addressed this at the high school, and so this will expand it throughout the district, middle schools especially targeted on there. Also, one thing probably to mention is that one thing that changed for us to be able to actually move forward on this, these type of projects, is that NDE changed the QSPUF language a little bit to be safety and security. Before it was just safety, so now it's safety and security, which opens us up a little bit so that then we can utilize that for some of these large cost projects, the cameras, the vape detection. If you notice in the vape detection, it's not just that, it's also it detects sound. So if you have that in a restroom and you have a fight or gunshot or things of that nature, then we get an immediate message and we can go to that particular location. Cameras are also concentrated on that as well. So it's stuff we're doing currently, have in place, and then this will enhance this and give us the opportunity to spread this within our other buildings. Does that hit it, Colin, or is there anything else I missed? Okay.
Ms. Albers.
And QCPUF didn't they used to use it for, or don't they use it for ADA compliance as well? And
Yep.
this is in addition to that.
It is.
Okay.
QSPUF they've changed it multiple times. I've been here for a while. At one time it was indoor air quality. And then we did a big heavy lift with this about 6-7 years ago, where it was safety and life safety and ADA. And so then we were able to take care of any ADA items, upgrade all of our fire alarm panels. So it morphs a little bit, and so this is another morph that is safety and security. So,
Well, just as much bad news as we got out of the unicameral last session, this was a little bit of good news.
it's really good news because this allows us to have a funding source for projects that would have taken, through time, probably another 8 years. You asked a question on timeline to implement. My expectation is we'll get it done within 2 to 3 years. It's a lot of work. And so between design, getting the contractors to do this work, some of it we can address in a 1-year time period, but From my past experience, it's probably gonna take us at least 2 and maybe a little past that, but not, no more than 3.
Mr. Hawley.
I have a couple of questions. So number one, on prioritizing with these security upgrades, do you have a hierarchy of which schools we're going to start with? Are we starting with senior high and working down, especially for things like AI-powered weapons detection, things like that? Do you have a plan for which ones you're going to do first?
Yeah, sure do. So we'll target secondary in particular. Like I said, a lot of this is already done at the high school, but that AI piece would be something that would be, I won't say immediate, but it'll be at the top of that list. The Raptor is already at the high school as well, and so then we'll move that into the middle schools and elementaries as well. You know, the camera system piece is such a large thing that we'll be looking at some of the top priorities of last year's project list. For instance, had Walnut and Westridge on there, and so we're going to pick those couple big projects up first to try to pick those, and because we balance between the project list, what we've had on there before, and then some of the stuff we'll be bringing forward. And so I'll be working with my safety team as well to make sure some of these things, it's a matter of getting a bid and get the contractor to put those in, and it doesn't take, you know, much more than that our first year. So I would say our first year, we'll probably have 3/4 of those completed. And then we'll need that second year to finish that up.
Okay. Next question. The camera upgrades, I've read the documentation. This is going to give us audio and video in the parking lots as well as throughout the schools. We're upgrading what we already have in the schools.
Video upgrade, and some of it is yes, because one thing that is extremely expensive is if you build a new building, it's not that bad. It's part of that contract to put those cameras out in the parking lot on poles. Doing it after the fact is a lot more expensive. So we're going to bring that on again. Focus secondary first, and then take that on to elementaries.
Okay. Last question. I was reading over the one for the window safety film, and I thought I might have seen a pattern, but I don't. So at the high school, at Lincoln Elementary, and at Barr Middle School, we have 3M night vision going on. Is there something specific about those particular?
No, those should all, the security film piece, when we did the security vestibule projects this last run with the ESSA $3, those vestibules have that security film in place at the vestibule. What this 3M product does in night vision, it's kind of that same thing where it's a security film, but it does a little tinting for us just for UV. What we'll do is we'll go do the entire district, and not just if we have existing vestibules that didn't have that, we'll address that. But more importantly, we also go to all of the entrances to the buildings that have windows, and we'll put that security film on those as well.
Okay.
So that, you know, if Westridge, for instance, has, I think, about a dozen entrances that have the glass, and so we'll go and do all those so that you can't have someone go shoot their way through the back door kind of thing.
Perfect. Thank you very much, both of you.
Yeah.
Ms. Jurgens.
I just had a question pertaining to well, now I lost my spot. The fire sprinkler system at Dodge Elementary. Is there not one now?
That is only for that north addition.
Okay.
We did that in 2005. Fire sprinklers are not a code requirement. So I think my predecessor and their team had did that one on a pretty strict budget, and it was one thing that they could leave off, because you don't have to, as long as you have a fire detection system. Now, a fire alarm system, fire detection system is required by code, but the sprinkler system is not. It's highly recommended.
I bet.
And I don't build too many buildings without them. There's one other location that doesn't have the fire sprinkler, and that's over at the Howard Annex. So that potentially might creep into this, just depends if we're able to, if we have the funds to do that. But, you know, we're still life safety, up to code, no problem, but that's why that's there.
Well, that was my next question, is do we have any other buildings that don't have this? So,
Just that one outbuilding at Howard. And the modulars. But typically, we don't fire sprinkler modulars.
Mr. Fisher?
Just because a number of our board members haven't had a chance to go through a QC Puff bonding process before, I guess just clarifying what the steps would be as far as the board. It's a board vote rather than you know, the kind of bond issue most people would think about. So if you would walk through that real quick for us, Paul.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. There's an attachment there that maybe folks have seen, maybe not, but it says timeline. If we want to take a glance at that, I've tried to do my best to identify milestones. So to start, we received a draft project list that we've spent time analyzing. Oh, yeah. You got it.
Sorry.
That's okay. So we've got a draft project list we've been able to analyze with legal and others, and we've gotten to a spot where we think it's a pretty comfortable working list. We are here tonight as a information discussion item only, just to talk through things, answer questions like this. Next step would be, as I mentioned earlier in my comments, to come back to the board and present the authorizing resolution that would be approved by a roll call vote of the board. This is not the type of financing that goes to a referendum per se, based on the limitations allowed by the state statute. We can do 3 cents on the assessed valuation for no more than 10 years. Used to be, as it was brought up, it used to be 5.2 cents for 10 years. So in 2016, they clawed that back to 3, and then they narrowed the scope of projects that could be used. So again, this is a nice step that they've broadened again, those types of projects. And then we're gonna go through the bond rating process. Because of the size being somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 million, the school district has a very good relationship with Standard & Poor's and maintains a high investment grade rating. And it seems to make sense to me that we continue that relationship and spend the time with Standard & Poor's to hopefully issue a similar investment grade rating on these bonds. It'll make it easier for our people to sell them as well, and we would expect to get lower interest rates than should we sell bonds that are non-rated or would not have a rating. So different types of buyers are in the market right now in these types of bonds, and I think that will improve our chances for broad distribution and hopefully execute in the neighborhood of somewhere cost of capital below 4%. I think I modeled 388, but rates are moving around a little bit. So 4% is my guess as to where the cost of money will come through. So we'll get that done. Tentatively, this is still very tentative, but I'm expecting maybe to go to market that first week of September. Actually, 3rd's a holiday, isn't it? But we'll be in the market probably that week or the week after, really targeting the end of September for closing. We were asked to plan to market in September, so all of this happens in the next fiscal year. And providing funds by the end of September shouldn't be a problem unless something weird happens in the markets. So does that kind of touch on it, Mr. Fisher?
Primarily, I just wanted them to know what their role was gonna be, and that would be to approve a resolution at the next meeting.
And that would be the only board action we would ask for. So again, it'll establish parameters for the sale of the bonds. It will appoint authorized officers to sign off on the final rates and terms once we get through the marketing period. And then there'll be some closing documents to sign that don't necessarily have to be signed in a board meeting, but we'll track down signatures by those that would be required to sign those documents after the bond prices are all settled or established. And then the money transfers then on closing date, which we've estimated to be on or about September 22nd.
All right. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Item number 5.3, bond fund tender offer refinancing. Mr. Paul Greer.
Great, thank you. So over the years, the school board has acted on refinancing existing bonds. Over the past, I've been working with the school district for your school district for about 20 years. And we've issued bonds for building projects, for QC Puff projects, and then we've also issued bonds for really just refinancing reasons. And most of the bond issues that probably all the bond issues that we've ever sold on behalf of the school district have been eligible for refinancing somewhere along the way. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, depending on how the financing was set up. So back in 2019 and 21, we had an opportunity based on the taxable bond markets. There was a change in the IRS tax code, and that became effective in 2018. We could no longer, I'm not trying to get too far in the weeds, but it'll help me, so I'm going to go really quick here. But there was a change in the tax code that no longer allowed us to issue tax-exempt bonds to refinance tax-exempt bonds in advance of the call date or in advance of the first redemption date. So when bonds are sold, we make a commitment to the market that investors will receive principal and interest payments for a period of 5 or 10 years, whatever the case might be. So in certain cases, issuers like the school district will refinance those bonds in advance of that time. So then an escrow is created, and the term is advance refunding. So we were no longer allowed to do that, but the dip in interest rates allowed us to utilize taxable bonds. And some may remember those financings, but we were able to issue taxable bonds to refinance tax-exempt bonds and save the school district meaningful dollars. So here we are. We never thought we'd touch those bonds again. Those interest rates are very low. Actually, this is good. This page is up. This is the existing bond issues that we're considering refinancing, or that we're talking about anyway. So you can see the interest rates are down in the 2s. Current interest rates are 4 and 5%. So in late in the year 2022, we started kicking around some math, and we thought, gosh, what if we didn't refinance for interest cost savings? What if we could find investors that hold the bonds and maybe offer that the school district could buy those bonds back from a discount? Because what these institutions that own the bonds have to do is when interest rates go up rapidly, the value goes down. So during the financial crisis, we heard on the news mark to market quite a bit. So a lot of these big institutions have to mark their positions to market. So they've taken big hits on some of these positions. So what we've found, and we've completed about 10 of these financings already, we found that there's a level that slightly above market value where certain bondholders might accept an invitation to tender or to buy back the bonds. So what we have here is we've identified about 60 million of target bonds that were used to advance refund on a taxable basis the previously issued tax-exempt bonds. And this is a little tricky because we don't know which bondholders are going to accept the tender offer should we go through with it. It's really unpredictable. At first we thought insurance companies wouldn't participate because of certain rules they have to live by, and that regional or commercial bank or community banks might be more likely to participate. So the first one we did, we were proved wrong. The insurance companies came through and made the deal work. And in that example, the community banks that held the bonds weren't interested in participating. Next deal we did a couple weeks later, the inverse became true. We were expecting the insurance companies to come through and participate. They didn't, but all the community banks showed up and helped the deal happen. So we really don't know how these come together. We've seen on average around 30% participation. So I'm showing that what happens if 100% of the bonds are tendered, which I know will never happen. I'm expecting about 30% of the bonds if we do the tender, about 30% of those to come through and help us do a refinancing. I don't know if those happen in the early years, the mid years, or the late, or some combination thereof. So we have to be real flexible with that. So what would happen in this case, should we go forward with this, is the board would have a chance to approve a resolution to set the parameters of sale and also approve an invitation to tender bonds. There would be public disclosures made immediately the following morning, and then we would go to work identifying the existing bondholders and start conversations with those bondholders and see if there's interest in participating. They won't give us too much color until we get to a period of time where we'd formally launch this 10-day window where they can respond and accept the opportunity. That would happen probably, that 10-day window probably gets launched after Thanksgiving because there's the escrow that was established to fund the previous bonds it pays off December 15th. So again, with the new tax code, we're not allowed to have two sets of tax advantaged or tax exempt bonds outstanding at any given time. So the idea is we'll do whatever it takes. We'll get the bond documents put together. We'll get our documents published in public, and then we'll see how the tenders come in. And then the way that the invitation is written is that the school board or the school district has the ability to accept or reject any of the tenders that come in. So we're not handcuffed to anything. All this does is set the stage for us to take advantage of what could be a win-win financing. And I think these are the best types of refinancings in one way, because we're not just exercising a call option or an opportunity to refinance bonds. This is something that the school district has to agree to, and the folks that own the bonds have to agree to. So to me, it's a win-win. That was a very long-winded explanation, so I apologize for that, but I appreciate everybody hanging with me. Did I say anything during those comments that caused any thought on questions, or does everybody kind of have a handle on what we're doing? We're refinancing not to save interest, but we're going to buy our bonds back at a lower number, and we're going to increase the interest rate on the bonds. So it's a little bit backwards, but we've had good success with it, and we've had a couple meetings with the F&F committee, and we've had a chance to talk through that, and I think we're in a good place. I just don't know what's going to happen as the markets continue to move around a little bit. This might make great sense when it's time to launch, and it might not. And if it doesn't, then we're not out anything. We're trying to do the best we can for the taxpayers, and I hope it works out. But if it doesn't, it was a little bit of paperwork that we put on the shelf.
All right, seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month. Thanks.
Item number 5.4, gift card prepaid Visa. Dr. Stevens.
Thank you. And Mr. Fisher, I just want to make sure that you can help me. I believe this is in reference to just a deviation and change to a business office procedure. So we have a business office business rule that we currently operate under for most of our purchasing. We do not currently purchase any kind of prepaid gift cards and or store cards in our work. We have a few times done so with prepaid cards. Sometimes when we send students on trips or something, that's one of the most efficient or effective ways to do that. So tonight what we're coming forward with is a deviation to that practice, specifically for our McKinney-Vento Act and our ARP funds. That's our funds that are from the summertime ESSER funds that are related specifically to our students that participate in our homeless programs. And we're asking for the change to the provisions in those business rules to allow for the purchasing of prepaid Visa type cards and or store cards to be used by our FIT coordinator, our social workers, and the distribution at times to our families to allow for the flexibility and being able to be nimble and responsive to our families in those situations, because sometimes the needs of our families and students in those situations, they're some of our most vulnerable students, and they have needs that we need to be very quick and responsive to. So we're just making that request, and we have put together some procedures and actions, tracking procedures and actions and family agreements that we will be using. So Most of you have seen those things that we've put together, and they come from the federal government. The USDE has put in place a Dear Colleague letter that promotes that. Title I actually already does that, and McKinney-Vento has that in place. So bringing that forward for you tonight and actually have that back in action items. Any questions?
Mr. Hawley.
Not a question, just a couple of clarifying points for the board. So when we talked about this, it's important to get this done tonight.
Yes.
Because you have a time frame that you have to hit, correct?
Correct. So not specific to McKinney-Vento funds, but for the HCY ARP money, that is funding that does have to be spent out by the end of September, but we would like to not necessarily carry those funds that we have right now into the next budget year. So we're looking at how we could take some of our remaining funds and get those into those gift cards so that we can then use them so that we're not spending them frivolously, but rather then we can spend them on needs that we really see fit instead of just potentially purchasing things and that we're actually putting it towards specific needs.
And even buying the gift cards, the money's spent by the deadline.
Correct.
But it still doesn't absolve the need. We have to have the gift card spent by the deadline too, isn't that correct?
That we don't have to have the
don't
gift card
have to.
spent by the deadline. No.
Okay, so we should have the money spent. And this, what you had told me, this is primarily for our students in need who are going to use this. This is what's going to get back to school clothes, shoes.
Correct.
School supplies, all of that, correct?
Potentially bicycles, helmets, personal care items, food at a grocery store. But yes, those are the items, and they're specifically for the students, not necessarily for the family.
And that's why we wanted to bring it, well, it's info in action tonight because we needed to make a policy change to allow this, but it's important for our students. You look confused.
Yeah, it's not a policy, it's just a business rule
Or a
change
business rule change.
that the group in FNF specifically felt needed to come before you so that you understood this is a deviation from the typical practice of the district. So that we didn't have people going, well, they bought gift cards and they bought gift cards. This is a deviation that is allowable by federal law.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, Dr. Stevens.
Sorry, I guess I just have a question. Since it's not, okay, sorry.
Ms. Wilson.
Since it's not a policy that we're changing, I'm trying to figure out why we're voting on it.
I'm going to defer that back to Mr. Fisher.
Because I was under the understanding at our last meeting, I think you mentioned it in policy, that it was more just so that we know that the procedure is going to change, or this was an exception to procedure.
Well, I think it goes back to that exception and like Dr. Stevens mentioned, what I think the FNF decided it should come to this, the full board and have the board act on it because it would then be a board-approved deviation, which then somebody else couldn't come to us as administrators and say, well, you know, you let this group do gift cards, why wouldn't you let us do gift cards? So in this case, it's actually a board-approved deviation, so that they would need to go through the same process if we felt that their, you know, situation rose to the same level, then we could bring it to the board, but it wouldn't just be them coming in and saying, well, how come you approved that for those people and not for us?
All right. No further questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Stevens. Item number 5.5, staff handbooks. Dr. Carrie Kohler.
Hello, I have the classified and certified handbooks tonight, the staff handbooks. They are not different, but they are different. Because of the growing legal requirements that have come about, Perry Law Firm created a template that then we took and then changed it into the GIPS, put some GIPS pieces into it. and have altered it a little bit, but it's more general. Instead of specific rules and regulations, it directs people back to the master agreement and the certified one, for example, and talks about the leave and referencing the negotiated agreement instead of putting those facts in there for people to see right there. So hopefully it will be a model that we can keep for a while.
Do we have any questions for Dr. Kohler? Seeing none, thank you. Item number 5.6, staff training requirements. Dr. Kohler.
Yes. Speaking of growing legal requirements, we have a resolution that I'm presenting tonight it goes through some of our staff trainings that we have required, and actually it's classified and certified, take the trainings, the majority of them. This is not all of the trainings, but these are some of the trainings that we are required to have a resolution on to say that the board has determined these trainings to be both reasonable in length and scope, and that then we are allowed to implement additional trainings if we see the need to, or to deviate from the source of the trainings. These are trainings that, except for the first one, the behavioral awareness, these are trainings that we have taken for years that are required. We use the parent-teacher conference in the fall typically for staff, the time in between the early dismissal, and when parent-teachers conferences actually start, for staff to watch the trainings and to catch up on those pieces. Any questions for me?
Seeing none, we'll head on to policy. Item number 5.7. Mr. Fisher.
Okay, the first policy that we have to look at is 6230 on staff protection. And this policy, really, we are looking at a relatively simple change to this policy. Basically, this policy is centered around situations where a staff member is injured, and it could potentially be a workman's comp type claim. And in those cases, there's language here that basically says an administrator will require the district employee to be examined by medical personnel, and then it listed the district nurse, a nurse, doctor, or physician's assistant to determine the extent of the injury. Well, our school nurses had brought to light the fact that there are some situations where they certainly would not be qualified to make those kind of determinations. And so they felt like they were in a situation that was asking them to do something that was out of the scope of what they were trained to do. And so as we discussed this with the policy committee, felt like was a good solution to this was simply to cross out those named medical personnel and just leave it simply at medical personnel to make that determination. And then that way, if it was a minor situation, the school nurse felt, comfortable making a determination, they certainly could. But if it was a situation where the school nurse felt like it was outside the scope of what they should be asked to do, then you would advance that on to some other medical personnel that would be more qualified. So, relatively simple change. Questions about that one? Okay. Excessive absenteeism is the next policy that we're going to take a look at here. And Dr. Stevens has actually been doing quite a bit of work with the county attorney and the people in the county attorney's office, and they really have put in some fairly significant revisions to that excessive absenteeism policy. The revisions are fairly extensive, but really the intent of the policy really doesn't change any. The one thing that's a little bit different is in the existing policy, there's this 95% of days that it was used as a standard. So basically, if, you know, the district had met for how many ever days, and a student had missed 90, or had missed more than 5% of the days, so they were in attendance less than 95% of the time, then this policy kicked in. And that was kind of a direction that the district had gone that was a little bit outside of what the statute says, and that really follows a 10-day per semester or 20-day total determination for excessive absenteeism. And so really, as the work has been done with the county attorney's office, the shift has really been back to that 10 days per semester, as far as looking at when, you know, things would kick in with the county attorney's office. And so that's really what the language here is about. There's quite a bit of revised language. I guess hopefully everyone had a chance to take a look through that. If there's any of it that you want us to read through, we certainly can. Otherwise, if there are any questions, we can certainly answer those.
Mr. Garcia Mendez.
Thank you. I thought I had seen it somewhere in one of these documents. But what constitutes, I'm sure there's a difference in what identifies an absence if you are in the elementary schools or in the middle schools.
So this is one of those kind of concepts that people have a hard time following. For purposes of this policy and for excessive absenteeism in terms of how the county attorney looks at it, and really how the state identifies what is an excused absence, there's really only one thing, and that's a school activity. Is the only thing that's considered in these situations to be an excused absence. Now, as you look through the language that's in here, there are times when certainly circumstances exist. A student has a long-term illness. You know, there's a death in the family. There's all kinds of circumstances that could be considered a reason for not going down the excessive absenteeism route and following through. And those are done on individual determinations. But the way the policy is used and the way the state counts attendance is the only things that are truly considered an excused absence is a school activity. So homesick, under doctor's care, you know, any of those kind of things. It doesn't matter whether, you know, but there is language in there that would say, you know, whether there is documentation that, you know, there's room for making exceptions in this policy. We don't get to make exceptions in terms of the way the attendance is counted. So when the state gives us our attendance, you know, numbers, anything that isn't a school activity is considered an absence by the way the state counts it.
Okay. So like if a student arrives to school late, they miss first period, that's an absence.
That's an absence for that period if it's a secondary school.
Okay. And my only question with this, just because we're dealing with a lot of transportation stuff, I guess is that I'm sure it is at the top of the mind for the district, like how we are going to be very proactive in terms of getting our students to school, because I don't want us to be in a case where next semester we are looking at data where a certain where students reach a certain level of absenteeism, and then they get referred off
Right.
into the court system. And then once a child is in the court system, we all know the detriment that has to that child. Right. And so I think as we're kind of like proceeding with this, I think one thing that I'd come back to and ask is, what are those like data points? Are we making sure that we're tracking, like, okay, if we do have is there an increase in absenteeism? What is it? And I know that the GIPS principals, counselors, and social workers are always really proactive in like working and trying to solve, like, hey, why are you late to school? Let's figure something out. And so I think it's just more so of like, that's the anxiety that I have, is like, how can we just keep that top of mind always?
And it will be,
But yeah.
you know, as you mentioned with the transportation, we're gonna have to be more proactive with, you know, principals and counselors, making sure that they understand the situation and make sure that we document when those absences occurred and why, and so that when we would get to an excessive absenteeism situation, that we've got, you know, good documentation to look at. Okay, this really isn't a situation, you know, that was something that the student was able to control.
Ms. Wilson.
We also talked about what an excused absence was, so we ended up adding that in in the first big red paragraph, second sentence, where it says only those absences that are for school-sponsored activity will be considered excused for this reporting purpose. And then if you go further down, it explains what Mr. Fisher was just talking about, as far as you know, the school is going to look at, you know, when it gets, I remember getting called, my daughter was in kindergarten, my oldest, and she was at like 12 days because we took a family vacation and Thanksgiving, and they called and said, you know, she only has 8 days left, and I was like, I got it, you know. But because I asked the same question, why am I turning in doctor's notes for their appointments that they're at if it's going to be unexcused anyway? And obviously they would take things, so if a kid is late, you know, that they document. I know secretaries are so great at documenting all the reasons why everything happens, so they would obviously take that into consideration before sending anybody to the county court.
Mr. Helinski.
Maybe I just need some clarification on this. We're taking out basically 95, you have to be there more than 95% of the time, correct?
That's
what
the
we
part
want change.
that's
We
coming
have
out.
180 days in a school year, correct? So we'd be 95%, we'd be about 171, right around there. So if we're doing 10 absences a semester, aren't we doubling that and allowing them to be gone more? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well,
Unexcused, obviously, but.
it is, actually, it's going back to what the state standard is, which is what we need to have in place for the county attorney's purpose. Basically, the way the statute reads is, we will develop in conjunction with the county attorney policy. So yeah, in effect, this would be a lower standard. You know, students could miss more before they're considered excessive absence, as opposed to the 95% that
So
was in place.
why are we, I guess, maybe I'm not understanding this, why are we accepting a lower standard then? Why don't we just leave it at 95%? I mean, why this push for this when we're doubling the days in a sense, really?
Well, I think it's really a part of how the county attorney's office feels like they can move ahead with doing their part of being involved in the process. It needs to reach those benchmarks before they're at a point where they feel like they can step in.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sykes.
Thanks.
you want me to speak? I would speak to that just as a follow-up. So, with this particular policy, the goal of this particular policy is in relationship to state statute of excessive absenteeism. And so nobody's arguing, I'd like 100% of kids to come 100% of the time that they're able to come to school. So that's not what's in question. So the struck paragraph's really kind of a philosophical, we'd all love all kids to come to school every time they're able to. The piece of this policy is really in relationship to the law of defining someone as excessively absent. And so the struck paragraphs kind of philosophically, you all would like kids to be present all the time. That's not really what this law is about. This law is about defining what's excessive absenteeism. So it's not in question that we all agree or disagree about absenteeism and 95% or not. We weren't following this per se. We weren't doing anything with it. No one's using it related to excessive absenteeism in the county attorney's policy or changes that the legislature just made. So the striking here isn't agreeing or disagreeing or changing our stance on we want you at school. It's trying to align it to the legislation and how we're going to take our steps at 3, 7, 10, 15, 20 days, the letters we send, not necessarily our whole stance on attendance. We can do that somewhere else. This is really to the law about excessive absenteeism.
Mr. Sykes.
I thought about the transportation piece as well, Eric, and like when I looked at this, I started to think and I go, well, if someone's tardy, that's 1 hour. It's not a full absence, it's 1 hour. And if they're granted 20 before prosecution, that gives them up to 160 tardies they could have before they reach that 20-day limit. Is that, I mean...
I think the attendance at the high school is done on a per period basis.
Right.
So
that's what I'm saying for secondary wise, that would be a...
But I think you would look at that period that they missed, and if they missed it 20 times...
I see, because it would be the same class.
That would be considered excessively absent for that period.
That's an interesting nuance in there.
I assume that's the way that they would interpret that.
No, it's... Right, so at elementary level, a tardy counts as 1, and it takes 7 tardies to count as an absence at elementary school.
Okay, but that's not the case at the middle school and high school level.
It's a course, it's a class period, is 1.
But, so, right, so like my question is though, is like that's not like they're gonna run the risk of failing the course, or is that they're gonna at the risk of being prosecuted for missing the 1 class?
Not for a tardy at a high school or middle school, but for missing an entire period, yeah. The potential is there, but one of the things to remember is if we did nothing, if we did nothing for 20 times, right? So that's making an assumption that nobody's doing anything to figure out what's going on, right? So I haven't seen that happen in any circumstance in my short time here. So that's a piece that it's definitely turned to us to make sure that we're doing what we need to do, right? Which is why we also have policy, not to put it on somebody else, but to put it on us, and that we carry out the policy. So that we do something, and that's why we have staff in place to do that. And some of the additional pieces. I did want to just do a quick follow-up that I think these are fantastic questions, and I'm going to talk with Mr. Fisher about bringing back in August the updates that we have done with the work with the county attorney and the updates that we're doing with attendance, so we can share that all with all of you.
Ms. Juergens.
Can you clarify a little bit about the special circumstances that someone might have that would push them over, but we would move it into an excused absence, like you talked about death in the family or something else? What does that process actually look like at the administrative level?
Dr. Stevens, you ran away too soon.
Oh, sorry.
You're the one that's got to deal with this before.
You know, there probably are many things. I think a death could be something. And I did want to clarify as well. So for a county attorney situation, if anything that is medically documented does not count, they will not consider those absences for the 20 days. So medically documented for mental health or physical health and the school absences. So they also don't count out of school suspensions towards the 20 days at the county attorney's stance. So it's everything else at the county attorney's level. So if you take into account a student have to miss 20 plus days, you know, to get to a level there. But special circumstances could be death in the family, has to go for a reason, for some other financial family reason to somewhere, to attend, you know, to support a family member in some way. I haven't had as many in my time here that would fall under that. We do count if a parent calls in for transportation reason that they can't get them to school, it still counts. You know, we do document that it was a parent called in transportation reason. We do have for our FIT families, for example, we transport a lot of kids in FIT that didn't have a ride from FIT itself. So we work really hard to make sure we're getting kids to school, and we've talked about our commitment to figuring out how we're doing that on all kids that have a circumstance. So we have a number of families that do leave the country for extended periods of time that we're really trying to work through. After 10 consecutive days not attending, you're supposed to be unenrolled from school. And we're really trying to work towards how we manage those. And we have a number of families who leave school for multiple week periods at different points in the year. And the county attorney's office is concerned because, as many would be, right? Because you're going periods of time then without learning opportunities. And then you're returning to us often times. And technically, if you maintain a residence in the county, even though you're leaving in a planned way for multiple weeks at a time, that still technically is supposed to be an absence. So we've been trying to not do that and count that towards a student, but it does count as an absence. But we've been trying to say, do you want to take work with you, or do you want to unenroll? But it gets a little dicey. So the county attorneys and us haven't quite been on the same page about that yet, but we're trying to work through that.
This is where we needed Dr. Dexter. She would have had all the information for years about what we've done. Other questions on this one? Okay, the other policy that we have here is our policy on student use of personal electronic devices, and really this is just an alignment of policy, a little bit of an adjustment, so that it matches what we changed our procedure at the high school with, where it says for elementary and middle school students here, that used to not be there, and this was the procedures for all students, whether they were elementary, middle, or high school. And with what we did with the no cell phones at the high school last year, this really became the procedure. And so now we want to make sure that our policy aligns with what we're doing procedurally there. So we would add this for Grand Island Senior High, and then those guidelines that were basically the guidelines that were put in place in January of this last year and intended to be used going forward.
Mr. Garcia Mendez.
Thank you. One little thing. Do we have to put like AM, PM in there? Like 8:05 AM to 3:30 PM?
I suppose it probably would be ideal to have those in there.
Just if someone
We will
like,
modify that and add those in there. Good
and then I
catch.
think 4 PM to 4:30 PM as well. Thank you.
Anything else anyone has about that one? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. On to item number 6, action items. 6.1 Transportation Routes for 2024-25 school year. Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Martin is not here to report on that. So, last month, the routes that we are going to offer for the coming year were presented as information. And this month, we would be looking for action on approving those routes and then the contract with Holiday for those services. So I guess, are there questions about where we're at with that process?
Ms. Albers.
Have you gotten any feedback from any families yet? Is anybody contacting the district or?
Yes.
Yes, like a lot or a
No,
few
not,
or?
honestly, not a lot. We have been, we sent out an email directly to families. Obviously, we've talked about the transportation situation and what the plan was for a number of months. And actually, we've had some media outlets contact us. So Mitch actually went back and looked at, I think there were 12 different times that we've put out some kind of information about what we're doing with transportation. So certainly it's been something that we've tried to be very transparent with. But as we expected, some people don't necessarily follow the news, and so until something arrived in their inbox, they weren't necessarily aware that we were making those changes in transportation. So we were, contacted probably by half dozen different people. I had some contact, Mitch had some contact, Dr. Stevens had some contact from different people. And so, it's one of those things that we, are going to have to work with people to help them figure out, what they're going to do in their particular situation to make sure they can get their students to school. And that's something we expected.
Ms. Malden.
I do want to say, I do commend them for putting it out in a lot of places. Yesterday was when we got the phone call, and I got the voicemail, and I got the email. So I think everybody's got it, hopefully. But I have seen more, I think, on social media of more of like the complaints. But I've also seen a lot of people actually working together, offering, saying, hey, I take kids here. I take kids here. I've got a front seat. I've got a back seat. So I am seeing already people are working together to figure it out. So I think that's great. I just wanted to put a little comment.
Awesome.
Mr. Garcia Mendez.
Thank you. I guess just a little tidbit of news, or I guess whatever. I saw that Rotary submitted a grant to get some bicycles, like to help out school kids in the school district. So I think that's really awesome, and just like to thank Rotary for that. But yeah.
Yeah, I was actually at Rotary the other day. They talked about that as being something that they had identified, and they've been working with Dr. Stevens to figure out what is going to be the most beneficial use of the dollars that they have. And and again, I think you think about those things, and I guess our hope would be is that our community does pull together and figure out how to help those, and certainly we'll be a part of that, but we can't be the entire part of the solution, or we're right back to where we were spending the dollars that we were spending. So, I think it's great that people are pulling together, because that's what needs to happen in a community.
Ms. Albers.
So Tanya Brown had contacted me about that, and so I talked to Mr. Fisher, and we were able to get Dr. Stevens and Tanya together, and then the grant was $1,600, but then at Rotary, they announced they're going to put additional funds and make it $3,000. So $3,000 to go toward transportation for fit families.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, I would accept a motion at this time to approve transportation routes for the 2024-2025 school year.
I make a motion to approve.
6.2, gift card prepaid Visa. Dr. Stevens.
Okay. I'm not sure what your motion is specifically, but just asking for moving forward.
The recommended motion is to approve the purchase of gift cards and/or prepaid Visa cards from federal funds as needed. I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve the purchase of gift cards and/or prepaid Visa gift cards from federal funds as needed.
Second.
Second by Mr. Garcia Mendez. Discussion? Seeing none, we proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Item number 6.3, substitute pay increases for the 2024-2025 school year. Dr. Kohler.
Mr. Harden presented the rates last month, so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Ms. Albers.
I was contacted by a substitute teacher, and she had some questions about if she was a long-term sub, so I did share what was in the document that we had just about the hourly rates and the increase, and she was pleased with that.
Mr. Garcia Mendez.
Thank you. Not a question, but more of like a comment. We, Lisa and I were out collecting signatures for petition today, and we met awesome school teacher from West Lawn, right? And she was asking about like the substitute rates, and we were like, oh, and they're gonna be hourly now. And she's like, oh, great, like that's good, that's really good. So just like a little tidbit that we had heard today, but yeah, no questions. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, I would entertain a motion at this time.
I make a motion to approve the substitute pay increases for the 24-25 school year as presented.
Seconded by Ms. Malden. Discussion? Seeing none, may proceed to a vote. Motion passes. Item number 6.4, extra standard increases for the 2024-25 school year. Dr. Kohler.
Presented the request for the additional coaches and sponsors to be added for next year. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Seeing none, I would entertain a motion at this time.
I make a motion to approve the extra standard schedule for the 24-25 school year as presented.
Seconded by Ms. Albers. Discussion. Seeing none, you may proceed to vote. Motion passes. Item number 6.5, staff handbooks. Dr. Kohler.
The classified and certified handbooks, if you have any questions about the attachments, feel free.
Seeing no questions, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve the classified and certified handbooks as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion. Seeing none, may proceed to a vote. Motion passes. Item 6.6, staff training requirements. Dr. Kohler.
I think this is my last one. If there are any questions on the resolution, just let me know.
Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve the staff training requirements resolution as presented.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Garcia Mendez. Discussion? Seeing none, may proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Well, it won't hardly seem like Dr. Kohler's been up here at all after I get through all these. One of the things that we discussed as we were going through this agenda, and this will be food for thought for you as we go through this, was would the board be comfortable with doing a single motion at the end of policies as opposed to doing each one individually? We're not going to do that this month, which we should have. If we were ever going to do it, we should have done it this month. But because of the number of them, it kind of brought that to light that it would probably be, a move towards being a little more efficient with our time if we didn't have to do a individual motion for each one. So think through that, and if the board is comfortable with that, that may be a direction that we head for the future. So with that, we'll jump into these. 4480 contracts, agreements, memorandums of understanding. Simple change here. There was a specific dollar amount listed previously that aligns with the policy on purchases. That policy actually had changed that number to 50,000 a couple years ago. This policy was not brought up to date with that, and so the recommended motion here would be just to change this so that it reads the approved amount in current purchasing practices, which is policy 4440. That would be the change that would be a part of this policy. Questions on that? Then the other part of this policy is basically talking about down here, notwithstanding anything to the contrary, no employee may enter into an agreement or understanding on behalf of the district that may financially benefit the employee, member of the employee's immediate family, or a business with which the employee is associated. This is policy that came out as a result of legislation that was passed, and this seemed to be the place where that would best fit.
Any questions for Mr. Fisher? Seeing none, I would approve, or I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve policy 4480, contract agreements and memorandum of understanding as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion. Seeing none, may proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
Okay, policy 2111, board operating principles. This was a policy that we had spent some time with previously, and then we figured out that there was one area that we didn't catch in that initial review, and that is down here in the information about board members. Part C there reads that if we have concerns about another board member, concerns should first be shared personally with the board member. If a resolution is not reached between the two board members, then the concerns will be directed to the board president. And then the third step would be there may be times the resolution will require a discussion with the entire board. And in the previous statement is said in an executive session. That is not allowed to discuss board members in executive session. That's not a reason for going to executive session. So the move would be to strike that.
Any questions for Mr. Fisher? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve policy 2111, board operating principles as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion. Seeing none, you may proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
Okay, policy 8470, weapons and firearms in school. Basically, again, as a result of legislative action, off-duty officers and also qualified retired law enforcement officers are now allowed to carry a weapon when they're not on duty. So we need to change the wording there So that would read that officers or other duly authorized law enforcement officers are qualified retired law enforcement officers as defined by and pursuant to state and federal law. And then we strike the part where it says when on duty or training, so they would be allowed to carry at any time.
Mr. Hawley.
If I'm not mistaken, isn't this in response to LB 1339?
Yes.
Okay. Is the verbiage that we're putting in here, does it have to be specific to what the bill states? I guess my issue with this, and obviously it's state statute now, but we're saying that retired law enforcement officers can Qualified, right, but I assume if you're a retired law enforcement officer, you'd be qualified.
No, you still have to go through a qualifying, you would still have to continue to go through the qualifying process.
What documentation do they carry that shows? Because my question is, I think the original intent of this bill was if a police officer gets off of work and they're going to go pick up their kids or drop off their kids and they walk in, we don't want to intentionally or unintentionally get somebody in trouble who may be carrying from coming from work. The way I understand this now is that if we're having a school picnic, a qualified retired law enforcement officer can carry at the school picnic. Now, we have students on the school grounds and they say, oh, gun. What are they going to hold up that says, I'm qualified? Where's the badge? Where's the uniform? Where's anything? So do we have any leeway in our policy to state, and I get it says pursuant to state and federal law, anything that says that they have to be able to identify themselves with something? Do we have leeway to add to this policy?
Potentially we could. That'd probably have to be something we would run by legal. This is obviously what we got.
Sure.
From legal, but that may be a question that they hadn't necessarily considered at the time they were putting the policy together. It also could be something that we included in our procedures, and that might be, the place for that. So I guess what I would say at this juncture is, because we need to approve this, we probably should go ahead and move forward with approving this. But we can certainly get back to our legal representative and ask that question, whether it's something that we should think about putting in policy or whether that should just be a part of our procedures. Because that is it's a legitimate question, is how would we be able to know that someone was a qualified retired law enforcement officer?
And I think this change caused me to sit back and read this policy several times. And even in the beginning, I'd like to read the first part of that paragraph. It's unlawful for any person to possess a firearm, including concealed firearms, in a school, on school grounds, in a school-owned vehicle, or at school-sponsored activity or athletic event. This policy shall not apply to A, the issuance of firearms to or possession by firearms of the armed forces of the United States, active or reserve, National Guard of this state, or reserve officers, training corps, or peace officers, or other duly authorized law enforcement officers or qualified retirement law officers as defined by and pursuant to state and local law. That first portion, before we add in this verbiage about retired law enforcement officers, we don't have anything in there stating military officers in uniform, law enforcement officers in uniform, with any identification for anything that we're allowing. So I would really like for us to go run this back by legal and see if there's any latitude for us to make some changes to this policy. Because I think that while the law, LB 1339, was intended for the safeguard of our students, I think it leaves a lot to be desired. And if we can add to that for our own safety and protection, I think it'd be great. And I'm open to anybody else's comments on this. I don't know if anybody else has thought this through.
Ms. Malden?
So, kind of pinging off what he said, isn't it like a law, like Nebraska prohibits anybody from possessing a firearm in school, on school grounds, in a school-owned vehicle, school-sponsored activity or athletic event. So regardless of the new law and everything, like, that's still a law, right? So whether they're qualified or not, they can't have it on school grounds anyways.
The new law
That's what the
supersedes
law
this.
changed, was to
Yes.
allow that.
Okay, okay. That's kind of what I was confused. I wasn't aware of that one, so I was like, isn't it kind of like combating?
Yeah, 1339 superseded that to where you could carry if you were, according to the verbiage that's in the bill.
Okay, so you're 100% spot on with what you say.
Ms. Albers.
So, are we under the gun? Did you see that pun there? To pass this?
We can probably hold off a month.
I'm just wondering if we shouldn't table it, just because I think you need to talk to legal, but there could also be some room to maybe talk to NASB and see if there need to be some updates. I mean, they pass bills all the time that like, oh, well, let's pass it and we'll fix it later. I would like, if we have some time, I would like to see us not do that with a policy.
I think we can do that.
Okay. Mr. Sykes.
You made mention, Matt, about being able to kind of dictate within our district with procedures, having a policy that falls in line with what state statute is, but being able to then determine within our district with procedure how that policy is executed. I'm just curious, like, I'm wondering if that would be a viable, I'm okay with tabling things, but I'm wondering if you've been pretty consistent to keep policy where it needs to be by law, and then putting the right things in procedure so that if we can allow those people to do it, but within our district, we can say you need to be in uniform, or like, are we allowed to do something like that with our procedures, or to have some kind of documentation that they would show if they're gonna, like we're saying, all these people can carry, but our procedure is you're allowed, but you need X, Y, Z. So I didn't know if that was an option,
Well,
and
I
I'm
think
okay with tabling.
that's the question that we can ask legal.
Can I piggyback off that, Mr. Fisher? I think that 1339, again, going back to, because it's statute now, we have to put the policy in place, and the policy is retired law enforcement, right? So they're not gonna have a uniform, so we can't state have to have a uniform, but I'm wondering what our latitude is on identification for that.
I was using that as an example.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's definitely room for some work here.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Okay, so I guess at this point in time, I would entertain a motion to table item number, 6.9, 8470, weapons and firearms in school.
I make a motion to table policy 8470, weapons and firearms in school.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion? Seeing none, may proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
Okay, the next policy is 2320, board member development. Actually, this is, again, in relation to statute that was passed, adding to this policy, really not changing anything in the existing policy, but adding to that membership in school board associations, which we are now required to list any memberships and fees that are paid, as well as any lobbying fees that are paid on our website. And that's what this policy basically addresses. Questions on that?
Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve policy 2320, board member development opportunities as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion. Seeing none, you may proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
Okay, policy 2411, notification of board meetings. This was actually legislatively an opportunity for us to have a little more leeway in how we notify about meetings and situations where a newspaper is not available. We're not really in that situation yet. We're still able to publish in a newspaper that comes out on a regular basis. A lot of districts are not anymore. But the legislature did give us the leeway to publish on website or by posting in situations where that exists. So the recommendation is that we go ahead and put that in our policy in case we would need to use that at some point in time.
Seeing no questions, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve policy 2411, notification of board meetings as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion, seeing none, proceed to vote. Motion passes.
Okay, policy 9230, access to district records. This was again a change in statute that previously we were required to provide the first 4 hours of work towards meeting a public records request free of charge for any group. This change in the statute now dictates that if you have a group from within the state or a media request for public records, that we are to provide 8 hours of work towards that public records request before we would charge any fees for those groups, and for any group that's outside of the state of Nebraska and not a media source, that we would have the ability to start charging with the first hour. So that's basically what the language is here. The old language basically is above, it's stricken, and the new language is below. Questions on that one?
Seeing no questions, I'd entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve policy 9230, access to district records as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion? Seeing none, may proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
Okay, policy 2480, public participation at board meetings. Basically, the board is now required to allow public comment at all board meetings. So that line at the end of the first paragraph is stricken. And then down below here, for all meetings of the board, individual speakers shall have up to 3 minutes to address the board, and the board shall hear up to 30 cumulative minutes of public comment. The board may vote to modify these time limits when the board deems appropriate. And the president may implement other reasonable requirements for public comment consistent with the Open Meetings Act. And then down below, it strikes what was previously applied to the president in terms of they're allowed to set time standards. So, questions on that one?
Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve policy 2480, public participation at board meetings as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion? Seeing none, I proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
Okay, policy 5510, food services management. Basically, we were required to put in place a statement saying that we would not use debt collection agencies to collect debts for our food service, which if we get to the everyone qualifies for free meals, should not be an issue whatsoever. So anyhow, the statute would say that we could not use a collection agency, and so that would be what the policy puts in place here.
Seeing no questions, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve policy 5510, food services management as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion? Seeing none, we proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
Okay, 7510, enrollment option. Again, the legislature made some changes in that area. Basically, they approved that a student can now have an option when they're at the elementary level. They can have another option when they're at the middle school level, and they can have a third option when they're at the high school level. And so basically there were a number of different statements in our existing policy. We really didn't change anything in the policy other than making it align with that language that would allow for 3 options, as opposed to how it was previously stated with the intent that there would only be 1 option.
Seeing no questions for Mr. Fisher, I'd entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve policy 7510, enrollment option as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion? Seeing none, may proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
Policy 8465, freedom of expression. The statement that we would be adding here really deals with religious freedom. The statement being the district will not substantially burden a student's right to religious exercises unless the student's religious exercise is disruptive to the school environment. There was that statement in there about not permitted by staff, and we are recommending that that part of the statement be struck, because it really doesn't make sense to have that in there. May pose a safety risk or would otherwise interfere with the school day.
Any questions for Mr. Fisher? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve 8465, freedom of expression as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion? Seeing none, may proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
8730, promotion, retention, and acceleration. Basically, the change in statute here basically mandated that the final say on whether a student was promoted, basically not the retained part of it, but the promoted, if a student was promoted or not, would rest with the parents if the certain qualifications existed. And if you look at it here, talks about the parent or guardian must provide evidence of academic needs, illness, or excessive absenteeism for an elementary student that would warrant the student to repeat the grade. So if those were the cases, if they could document, provide evidence of that, then regardless of whether the school felt that student should be promoted or not, the parent could elect to have their child retained. And then at the high school level, it basically, or the middle and high school level, let's see where the statement that it makes there. A student in grades 5th through 12th grade may be retained due to excessive absenteeism. So that would be the only criteria there. So again, if a student had excessive absenteeism, the school felt like they should be promoted, the parent felt like they should be retained. Ultimately, the parent would have the final decision there.
Mr. Hawley?
Might be a silly question. Is there anything in state statute that says how many times you could do this?
No. And that was one of the questions that came out of that after this legislation was passed, is could a parent choose to retain their child multiple years? And the answer to that, the way it stands right now, would be yes.
Do you know if there's anything going to come back to the legislature next session about this?
It may, as Lisa alluded to earlier, sometimes they pass legislation and then they go back and fix it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve policy 8730, promotion, retention, and acceleration as presented.
Second by Ms. Halbers. Discussion. Seeing none, may proceed to a vote. Motion passes.
And finally, 8740, graduation requirements. This one, we really had talked last month about the statement that needed to be added, that a graduation requirement would be that the graduate complete and submit a free application for federal student aid. So all students would have to complete the FAFSA as a graduation requirement, or they would have to go through the waiver process. So there's that. When we did this, Dr. Dexter also noticed that we hadn't updated up above where it said science. It said physics. It should say physical science. So we're also thinking that we should change that one and make that align with where we should be.
Any questions for Mr. Fisher? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve policy 8740, graduation requirements as presented.
Second by Ms. Albers. Discussion. Seeing none, you may proceed to a vote. Motion passes. Reports. 7.1 Grand Island Public Schools Foundation Report.
The 2024 Harvest Gala will be held on September 26th, 2024 at Riverside Golf Club, with the presenting sponsor being Tom Dinsdale Automotive. In July, the foundation will announce the recipient of the Miller Legacy Professional Development Grant to a teacher that is furthering their education. 2024 scholarship program statistics were presented to the GIPS-F board. The board acknowledged another amazing year of supporting students to fulfill their dream of continued education. Teacher of the Year Committee convened and chose the winners that will be celebrated at the 24-25 Welcome Back, which I definitely encourage all of our board members to attend if you can. It is a lot of fun, a great way to kick off the year. And the foundation will not have a July board meeting. That concludes this report.
Thank you, Ms. Juergens. Item 7.2, Superintendent Report.
Okay, on Monday, our legislative committee met.
I'm going to turn your mic.
I probably should. That'd be better. On Monday, the legislative committee met kind of as a prequel to the special session that we anticipate the legislature having. And actually, Angela Amick, our lobbyist, was on hand to kind of give her thoughts about where that special session might go. There's, I guess a lot of different scenarios that could come out of that because it is a broad topic that they are calling this special session for in terms of tax relief, which leaves a pretty wide open thing for introduction. So I think everyone that I've heard from that is connected to the legislature feels like there will be a number of bills introduced. It could be a somewhat contentious special session, and the question of whether there will be anything that comes out of it is pretty highly maybe in doubt. The governor is certainly pushing to do some very major reform in terms of how schools are financed. His latest plan has schools being financed entirely through the state, which is a little worrisome in terms of the stability of that and where that could go. I don't know that that's going anywhere, but there are maybe some compromise pieces that he's really looking to get to have happen. And one of the things that would be worrisome from the district standpoint is that he's kind of shifted his position from being okay with the sliding cap that existed for schools under LB 243 that allowed the board to vote to go beyond the 3% hard cap. He's kind of shifted his position to holding firm on a hard cap for schools as well as other government entities. So it'll be an interesting session. I know Lisa spent some time with the governor today. I don't know if she heard anything any different, but I would invite her to share anything if she's picked up anything in that arena.
So I was invited to this 6 region, 1 state kind of meeting today. And I told Mr. Fisher, nobody knew why we were there. And it was a room full of people. And they even said, does anybody know why they're here? And we're all like, no, we weren't sure what they're going to be discussing. But I had told Mr. Fisher about it. And I wondered if we wouldn't be if property tax might be on the table, but it was not. We were talking more about what the needs were of our state or of our region. It followed the community college region, so our region is for the Central Community College region. And, interestingly enough, I mean, there were people there from, Kearney and Hastings and Columbus and, smaller towns around our region. But the top three concerns that everybody had that came after, 5 hours of discussion are housing, workforce development, and childcare. So, it's just absolutely everywhere. So, but what this isn't just a think tank. This is going to be a very proactive body. We're supposed to invite people that weren't at the table that should be at the table. So Mr. Fisher will hopefully be getting an invitation as well. I'm going to be putting his name down. So I guess just kind of let's see what happens with this. So there are people in the room that can make stuff happen, and it should hopefully be a very interesting and productive group. So looking forward we're going to meet 2 or 3 times a year, but we're going to have Zoom meetings up until our next meeting. So I'll keep you guys posted.
Thank you, Ms. Albers.
So that ties right in with the next thing that I had on my list. Earlier this week, I did attend a meeting of the GI Housing Coalition. Again, there's a lot of different work that group is doing to try and identify, where the greatest needs are, what would be potential solutions. They are going to have some surveys coming out, so if you get a chance, I would certainly encourage all of you to participate in that survey. They really are trying to pin down what specific needs are, and then really try and focus on what might be some possible solutions to our housing needs here in Grand Island. Today I attended a safety workshop over in Kearney. Again, ties into what we talked about with the QC Puff bonding earlier. A lot of the things the state director for the Department of Ed, their safety person, was there, and he shared a lot of really encouragement towards doing a lot of the things that we're talking about doing with those dollars. And we did get some of that grant money that was out there. He had really lobbied for $50 million. We got $10 million across the state. They got over $60 million worth of requests for that $10 million. So if the $50 million had been approved, we probably would have got a little bigger chunk of the things that we are now looking at. How can we pay for other ways, paid for through the state? But hopefully they'll continue to lobby, and maybe the next year the legislature will fund at a higher level, and we can maybe tap into some more of that money. Lead GIPS is coming up on July 22nd. That's our opportunity to bring all of our principals and all of our department heads together and really talk about where we are as a district and where we want to be moving. And so having been through it once now, I would say it's a really good opportunity to bring our leadership from across the district together and have some really good dialogue. And then I would echo what Lindsay said. August 12th, put it on your calendar. Welcome back. That morning should be really good. We've got I think a good national speaker coming in. We were able again to share, do some cost sharing with Hastings. They do the same thing. They're gonna use the same speaker in the afternoon, so that's worked out. That worked out for us last year. It's gonna work out for us again this year. And so we're really gonna shoot to streamline our. We've been about 3.5 hours. We're going to shoot for 2 to 2.5 hours this year, and Mitch is confident that we can get it done. And so hopefully have a really good, inspiring kickoff to the school year. So certainly any of you that are available would love to have you attend. That's all I have.
Okay.